Okay, it's just a little bit after 2 o'clock, so 2 p.m. East Coast time. So I'd like to welcome all of our participants for this special peer-to-peer on the new Department of Energy and Innovation Foundation. And we're excited to introduce David Hart, who is with the ITIF, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. You know, ITIF is a friend of AURP. Rob Atkinson has spoken at our conference. Stephen Esdol has been on webinars with us, and we're delighted to have David Hart to talk about this new entity. The Department of Energy Foundation has a more formal title that David will talk about. But I just wanted to mention many of our parks have relationships with Department of Energy labs across the country. I believe there are 17 national labs. And we just had Idaho National Lab join AURP, welcome Idaho, and Sandia Lab in New Mexico, Albuquerque, has been a long-time member of AURP. And, you know, I'm coming to you from the University of Maryland Discovery District in College Park, Maryland, and in our Discovery District, a part of the Pacific Northwest National Lab, which is out of the state of Washington, also has a research facility in our lab, in our district here. So the point is, many of our parks, even if you don't have a Department of Energy lab next to you, many of your companies in your parks are supported by Department of Energy. You know, the DOE has had a major role in innovation in many, many areas. One I like to cite is, the sequencing of the genome actually was done by the Department of Energy in partnership with NIH, but it was the computing power that Department of Energy had back 20 some years ago that was fundamental in helping sequence the gene. And so there are many other examples of DOE technologies and DOE labs being at the forefront of leading technology advancement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David to give you an overview of this new foundation that was part of the CHIPS Plus Science Act. That
we lost your video audio, Brian. Brian, we lost your audio. So I will take that as a sign that I should go ahead and present.
Thank you, David. Yes, I think if you just go ahead, we can have
Sure.
Brian make his comments later. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let me thank AURP and Brian for inviting me. I think this is a great audience to speak to about this topic, and I hope you all get involved in the effort to get this thing launched and get it off to a good start so it can contribute to addressing really important challenges that DOE has on its plate, which have been expanded greatly by the legislation of the last year or so. So the entity is called the Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation. We used to call it the DOE Foundation when we were advocating for it, but this is the name that Congress gave it. And we sometimes call it FESI. I don't know if that'll stick or not, but if you refer to it by FESI, or if I refer to it by FESI, you'll know what I'm talking about. And let me also say that I'd be happy to take questions. I really want to know from you guys, how this foundation can be useful to you, building bridges with DOE. And I have some questions at the end where I'll ask you for your pain points, but if people have comments or questions along the way, I guess we can feed them in through the chat, and either Vicky or Brian can stop me and interrupt me. Happy to take questions along the way, but I'll certainly leave some time at the end to get your thoughts, and also welcome your thoughts by email or any other way that you'd like to contact me. So Brian mentioned ITIF. I don't need to say anything more about who we are. You know Rob, you know Steven, so I'll just go past this one. I did actually, my title is actually out of date. I'm no longer the director of the center. I'm a senior fellow at the center, and Ed Reiter has taken over the directorship as of a couple of weeks ago. But we are the arm of ITIF that deals with climate and energy technology and really focused on accelerating innovation to solve our clean energy and climate challenges. So I am a professor at George Mason University and work with ITIF part-time on this topic, but we have a group of people who's full-time staff at ITIF on clean energy innovation. We are now working to stand up FESI, or at least create the conditions under which it can be stood up quickly. I'm working with a company called Sustainability, which is run by Carrie Dugan. Some of you may know, long established member of sort of the climate and energy policy community. Was really the lead advocate for over the last few years. Our project is funded by the Schmidt Futures Foundation, and it's not part of the DOE. So we are in dialogue with DOE, but DOE is still establishing its internal process to set FESI up. So we're working outside, doing the kinds of things that I'm doing just now to build interest and awareness of FESI and you know, make it get off to a quick start, which has not always been the case for other federal agency related foundations. So this is one of those rare things that ITIF can take credit for. I talked to the person in Senator Kuhn's office who was the original sponsor of the bill, and he took it out of a report that was published in 2016 by ITIF. Brian actually sent me a report that he was involved in, calling for the federal labs, national labs, to have foundations, which some of them do. But it's been an ITIF priority for the last few years, and I think it's fair for us to take credit for having gotten it into the bill. But as they say in Washington, success has many parents, and we've had a lot of allies and partners in this project, but we I think are the main sponsor associated with it. I mentioned Jetta's work in 2019 and 2020. We really put together the concept in detail, ran a couple of workshops with stakeholders from various kinds of entities, startups, labs, big companies, investment firms, and so on. So we tried to get a variety of perspectives on what a foundation working with DOE could do. And we produced a report in 2020. As many of you may know, a number of federal agencies do have foundations associated with them. The best known one is the National Park Foundation. So that works with the National Park Service. If you want to help out your local park, so Brian and I are here in the Washington, D.C. area. Shenandoah Park is not far away. If I had a fondness for that place and wanted to make a contribution, I could give money to the National Park Foundation, and it would work with the National Park Service to carry out projects. Maybe they want to spruce up a visitor center or clean up a campground. And because the National Park Service is a government agency, it can't receive, contributions from citizens directly. Well, it can; those are called taxes, but it can't receive, a charitable contribution. So the foundation is an intermediary that allows private citizens to contribute. The agency foundation that we modeled ours most closely on is the NIH Foundation. NIH is a research organization like DOE. And the thing that I found most exciting about what the FNIH does is that it puts together a consortia of private sector companies that are working on common problems and kind of initiates, larger efforts where they collaborate with NIH. If there's a group of pharma companies that see a disease challenge that they might work on together, the FNIH can help put that together and then, build a bridge to a public-private partnership, which might then take off on its own. The Agriculture Foundation was set up in 2014 under the Farm Bill. Its approach is somewhat different. It's more interested in competitive funding, whereas USDA is not really a competitively funded agency. So the big thing is that each of these agencies is a little different depending on the mission of the foundation and so on. And actually, as we went through this project, we discovered more and more of these things out there that we didn't realize. So, for instance, there's a BLM foundation being set up now that was authorized in recent legislation. So what makes them different? So their big difference is that Congress tells the agency that it can work with this outside entity. It is a 501c3 private entity, but it has a special relationship with the department or the agency that it works with. For instance, it may have the authority to give the agency money directly. It may be, it may be that the agency administration tells its staff that it can work, in a more streamlined fashion with the agency. So the whole purpose of this thing is to make the public-private partnerships easier, smoother. If it's not any easier to work with DOE through the FESI than it is to work with DOE directly, then it's really not contributing. And it's this congressional authorization, I think, and the agency's implementation of that authorization that really make that possible. And that's what we see with these other entities. Some of these agencies proved their value during the COVID pandemic. So there are 3 mentioned here: the CDC Foundation, the FDA Foundation, and the NIH Foundation. Of course, the pandemic came on quite quickly. And one of the virtues of these foundations is that they can be pretty nimble. So they were able to spin up fundraising efforts, especially on topics that are a little bit more difficult for the agency to tackle. So in the case of the CDC Foundation, they raised a lot of money for communication, which was crucial for addressing the pandemic. And it would have been more difficult for CDC to do the things that it did in that area without the foundation. So that was a really encouraging example. And obviously we're in a climate crisis. It's a slower moving crisis than COVID-19, but there's no time to wait to address that. So I hope that FESI can step up and help out in some ways that are analogous to what these foundations did in response to COVID-19. When we put together our project, we thought about 3 different ways of organizing such a foundation. There are already several national labs that have their own foundations that are akin to the way public universities have foundations. So I work at George Mason University. To receive foundation contributions, we have a foundation, because we're also a state agency, so we have the same problem that DOE has. And so Berkeley Lab, Los Alamos Lab, a couple of other labs have foundations. And so one vision for such a foundation would simply to be encourage all the national labs to have their own foundations. A somewhat more networked idea would be to take those labs and have them work together through a national association. The VA has a network like this. So every VA research center has a foundation of its own. And there's a national association that sort of provides support to them, back office functions and so on. And then the most ambitious, which is the one that we ultimately went for, was to set up a national foundation to work with the agency as a whole. So we call it the Energy Technology Commercialization Foundation. We're particularly interested in accelerating commercialization of clean energy and climate technologies. It would still work with the lab foundations, but would have its own activities as well. So we put forward this report where we laid out the vision, and by we, I mean Jetta Wong and I in 2020, and argued that it could really help out. I think all of you are aware of some of the challenges that DOE has in technology transfer, commercialization, and the more entities I think that we have sort of trying to address that gap, the better. And this is a proven, a way of doing business with these other agency foundations that we thought we could replicate. So I won't prolong the valley of death. Everyone here has seen it. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. And we did a little research, and we can show, I think, quantitatively that there is a good deal of money going to the basic science side of energy. There's also a lot of money going into the advocacy side where I reside, but not too much in that middle zone, that valley of death, which we see in philanthropic contributions as well as in the commercialization process. So what we hope the foundation will do is facilitate collaboration between the public and private sector. It can put together partnerships more easily than the agency can on its own, or that private actors can on their own. And there should be, a very robust learning process that it facilitates. We came up with 2 very broad themes that we thought that the foundation could take up. One is dealing with national energy innovation challenges. So here we see an example from marine decarbonization. This is an area that accounts for about 3% of all global emissions. It's a pretty complex institutional setup. If you're talking about decarbonizing a port, you have the vessels. There may be multiple kinds of vessels, commercial vessels, ferries, and so on. Then you have the port infrastructure itself, and as well as all the trucking associated with the land transport, short distance land transport. So this is the kind of challenge where there's a lot of stakeholders, and an entity like FESI might be more nimble than DOE in facilitating collaboration. And at our workshop, we had a presentation on what's going on in Seattle and Los Angeles around this theme. Another, and this will be more familiar to you guys, and hopefully something where we could get some feedback, is to help with regional energy innovation ecosystems. And labs are obviously a target for that, but it's not just those places that have national labs. Universities, other kinds of research organizations, can contribute to clean energy innovation, and the foundation, many of them get funding from DOE already. So the foundation could be a bridge between those kinds of entities, states, localities that want to have economic development strategies built around energy innovation, or in which energy innovation is some component. So those are the two big ideas that we put forward for FESI, or the DOE Foundation, to make a difference, sort of national challenges in regional ecosystems. Then we built some support. We got a number of organizations to endorse it. There was also a National Academy of Public Administration study that was required by Congress on this topic. If people are interested, especially in what various other agency foundations do, they really did a thorough job of reviewing those. And they also recommended the creation of a DOE foundation. We found support in the philanthropic community, among CEOs, and so on. So,
and by the way, David, we were one of those 80 organizations. We signed on. AURP signed on. I'm sure we put you over the top, but
no. But I appreciate your mentioning that, and I should say thank you to everyone who endorsed that. So that's great. And we're still, of course, we'll be coming back to you for more signatures in the future, because this never ends, of course. So this was always a bipartisan project. I think that's really important from the start. And it went through something similar to the regular order of Congress. It took 3 sessions for it to go through. We worked on both sides of the Capitol and both sides of the aisle. We had a hearing. It passed the House, didn't pass in that session. Then it passed the Senate. Then we needed the House to pass something similar. And then over the summer, we were sort of waiting around, I think, like everybody else, to see if anything big would pass. And it was a little bit surprising that the CHIPS thing came through, but we were able to get once it was CHIPS Plus. So some of you may know, was it going to be CHIPS, which was just be the one bill, or would it be CHIPS Plus, which was sort of the omnibus? And we got the CHIPS Plus, so we were part of that, and now it's enacted. So that phase of our work is done, and now we're really in the implementation stage. So as I mentioned, it has this new name. Other differences from what we proposed, and I would say our mission is called out specifically, the commercialization mission, but FESI has authority to work on any aspect of DOE's scope, which is of course very broad, includes basic science, includes the nuclear complex. The legislation called out a number of other activities. So while I'm really keen on building public-private research partnerships, it can support fellowships, it can support STEM education, and it could also deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion, depending on what the board wants to do. So really anything that the DOE and FESI agree upon, it can do. So here's the authorization. If you want to go to the CHIPS bill and look it up, you can find it on page 865. According to the law, the Secretary of Energy is supposed to set it up by February 5th. It has the missions, as I already mentioned. It'll have a board that is drawn from a list put forward by the National Academy. So the National Academies has to have a list of candidates for the board, and the Secretary chooses the initial board. Then once the initial board is set up, the foundation becomes self-sustaining. So the Secretary is just involved in that initial selection. And also 3 senior members of the DOE have ex officio chairs. So there should be a strong linkage between the agency and the foundation through the board. It can engage in a lot of different kinds of activities, can provide research funding, can run prize competitions. It can communicate with stakeholders in various ways. Congress is very clear that it wants the FESI to work with the existing lab foundations, and it actually enables NETL, the National Energy Technology Lab in Morgantown, West Virginia, to set up its own foundation, which it's a little bit different from the other 17 labs. So there's 16 government-owned contractor-operated labs and one government-owned government-operated lab, which is NETL. So the legislation allows NETL to set up its own foundation and allows FESI to give the government money if it wants to, as well as to solicit contributions. So it is a 501c3. It's governed by its board. There are some guidelines in the law about the diversity of the board. So Congress is clear that it wants the board to represent a variety of different sectors and regions. It needs to have a strong staff. The staff has to have some technical chops. It has to have some business chops. It has to understand how to raise money from both the private sector and philanthropy. And it needs to understand DOE. So, you know, it's going to take the right kind of person to run this thing to really get it off to a good start. It's very important that FESI not duplicate what DOE does. It's meant to be a complement and a supplement to DOE. The streamlined contracting authority, I think, is really important, and that's something we're really looking to DOE to work out. As I said, if it's not any easier to work with FESI than it is to work with DOE directly, then FESI doesn't really add any value. So, you know, whether it's some kind of a standardized MOU or standardized contracting process, that's one of the details that's really important. We want the secretary to tell the staff of the DOE that it should work with FESI. I do think there's a pent-up demand within DOE to sort of work around some of the red tape that holds them back from working with the private sector. And I hope that DOE staff will see it as an opportunity to put together initiatives with FESI. But ultimately, this thing will succeed or fail on a cultural level. We need DOE staff who are collaborating with the private sector to feel confident that FESI has their interests in mind, that it's pulling in the same direction. Its mission is the same as DOE's mission. So, and that's what we heard from the other agency foundations that we talk with, that it really needs a strong working relationship with DOE. So this is what we're up to now. We have a group of advisors, including folks who have experience with the other agency foundations, as well as within DOE and the private sector, that are developing proposals. How should FESI operate? What should it do? We're doing the kind of outreach that I'm doing today to build awareness of it, to build understanding of it. We would love to have project opportunities. Once FESI gets stood up, it would be great to have some quick wins, but also meaningful projects that deliver, emissions reductions and security improvements in the energy sector over time. And we're also hoping to get it funded by Congress. So we don't think that FESI will be primarily funded by the Congress. The Ag Foundation does get a big slug of money in the Farm Bill every few years, but we think FESI should primarily be funded by the private sector and philanthropy. But it does have authority under the legislation to get a one-time startup funding of $30 million, which obviously will help attract private capital. And other than that, it would be like $1 million or $2 million every year to keep the lights on, so the staff doesn't have to raise their own salaries every year. And that's the pattern at the FNIH and some of the other foundations. So hopefully by the end of this process, it may not be in February from what we understand from DOE, but relatively soon in the spring, we hope that FESI will actually exist and start doing work. So that's what we're up to. Yeah, this just shows you the timeline. We worked on it for several years, and now we're sort of in the transition from advocacy to implementation. So here's what I would love to hear from you all. What can FESI help with? What could it work on? Especially projects that could be early wins. And who else should we be talking to? Who else needs to know about this? If any of you have regional or local groups that you'd like me or my colleagues to meet with, we'd be happy to do that. So with that, I'll throw it back to Brian and be happy to take your questions.
Yeah, David, great. That's a fantastic overview. I wish all federal labs, had this kind of flexibility. I know a lot, I'm in the DC area, as mentioned, and, I work a little bit with the foundation at NIH. So a couple questions, and Wayne Savage from New Mexico sort of had the same one I did, which is, well, let me take this a little broader. So there are many partnerships opportunities with DOE labs currently. I know in the new CHIPS Act, a couple things they did. They authorized entrepreneurial leave for DOE employees, so presumably to create more startups. So off the top of my head, I would think that would be a huge opportunity. Those startups have to probably be outside the DOE lab, so research parks could be where those startups could be. So I would think that would be a pretty interesting role we might play. Secondly, just looking at that map you've had of the DOE clusters across the country, it looks a little bit like we are now working with the Build Back Better EDA Regional Challenge Consortium, and they're not exclusively energy related technologies, but I think there's some overlap with the EDA Build Back Better challenge winners, and our association actually is working with EDA through something called the Communities of Practice. And so, I think there's some potential synergies there. And as well with the National Science Foundation Engines Program, so that's another large initiative that has some parallels there. Wayne's specific question was really about like SBIRs and STTRs, which many of our parks work with, or there are companies in our parks, or they work with intermediaries in the regions that help provide funding to write the SBIR, or maybe hire a consultant. So what do you see the foundation doing with SBIR and STTRs?
Great. Yeah, let me take those in order. So I think, well, I'm going to start with the middle one. So I actually think this regional development theme is a huge part of the last burst of legislation. So you mentioned the Build Back Better challenge. About a quarter of those awards went to energy related projects. I think the NSF Regional Engine Program is going to have energy related projects. There's supposed to be a big program in Department of Commerce to set up new technology hubs that Rob Atkinson was the main proponent of. And there's also some specific DOE programs as well and CHIPS to set up
energy incubators, right? I mean, I think there's
an energy incubators, there's a regional energy innovation program. These are much smaller than some of the other agencies, but I mean, I guess the main, and plus we have all this infrastructure money, which ultimately lands at the regional level too, hydrogen hubs, direct air capture hubs. So there's a huge amount of funding coming for regional activities. And so I think you're right that that's a big theme. And I think FESI should be part of that. So I was glad that we had thought of that in our report, and it makes sense, given these locations around the country that it can work with. So I think there's a lot of different things that FESI could do. What it ultimately does will depend on the board. But for instance, if there was a philanthropy that wanted to support entrepreneurial leave, and we have found, philanthropies out there that are interested in entrepreneurship and startups, they could give money to the FESI to supersize that program, or small business vouchers. I don't know about SBIR. That's a little more complicated because of the way it's set up as, a portion of the agency's R&D budget. But it seems to me you could have complementary activities. There's some talk about SBR phase 3, which doesn't really exist. So maybe there would be companies or investors who want to have an SBIR phase 3 for DOE that would, work with the foundation to set something like that up. So I do think this is a very fertile area that FESI ought to be involved in, straight up the alley that we were most concerned with, which is the commercialization piece. And again, to the extent that you guys are able to identify pain points or problems that, either DOE is, legally unable to carry out, or culturally, institutionally has challenges where FESI could grease the wheels, that's what we're looking for, where people in the community would say, wow, this is actually solving a problem for us. That's what we really want.
Yeah, I would think maybe a group like the Kauffman Foundation or something might be interested, but
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they're obviously supporting entrepreneurship. What about, so, in my region, a lot of companies go after ARPA-E funds, that's a different part. So how do you see this foundation working with ARPA-E, if at all, or is that just going to go on its own?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, ARPA-E, it is already sort of a cost shared setup there, and they've now initiated a scale-up program, so they have a kind of follow-on. But I think that has been a gap for ARPA-E, that sometimes companies, that either get formed as a result of ARPA-E awards or get ARPA-E awards, those are not huge awards, a few $1 million, and then they get to the next stage, especially for some of these hard tech areas that are capital intensive. They sometimes get stalled there, from what I understand, and that's what the scale up program is supposed to help with, but it's a pretty small program. So I think FESI could help find, I know there are various efforts within DOE to provide these sort of matchmaking services between, the startups or small companies and their customers or potential acquirers. And I think FESI could potentially play there. I think it's important for it not to duplicate what DOE is already doing, but where DOE isn't very effective, or maybe there are specific industries or problems, where it could create a center of excellence around this. I think that would really be another area that it might make a difference in.
So how can AURP and our members help? And I'll give you 2 points. One, for our members that are in states that have an existing DOE lab. And then if you could talk about, what about states that don't have a resident DOE lab? Still, how can they help in moving this along? Because I happen to believe this can help national competitiveness. There's a lot of money, not just in the CHIPS Act, but the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, there is lots of money going into energy writ large, and clearly we need it. So how can those that have DOE labs in their communities, and those who don't, what can we do to help?
Yeah, so the DOE labs, as I mentioned, some of them have foundations, like NREL just set one up in Golden. And I think some of them are really trying to reach out a little more than they used to in the past. And, I would hope that members of this organization would be in touch with those lab directors or their, sort of outreach people or sort of partnership folks, and encourage them to engage with the regional economy. Some of them are weapons labs, some of them may not be really oriented towards that, and they're going to vary. The ones that have the strongest interest are the ones that are associated with the applied energy offices, but there's no reason to limit it to that. I think some of the basic labs could also have spin-offs, have relationships with industries in their region. So I think this entity can help build those dialogues. It can be a convening body, maybe a more neutral one in the lab itself. I don't know whether every lab needs to or wants to have a foundation, but we know that there are some that are working on that, and that would be another thing to touch base with the lab on, to see if they're trying to set up their own foundation and again, kind of get beyond the fence line, create a presence that's outside the gate, which is pretty intimidating sometimes for people in the community. With regard to everybody else, which is most of the country, of course, DOE funds research in lots of universities, and there's no reason why FESI couldn't help out with activities that are academic research or company funded industrial research projects that are funded by a DOE, and there's a lot more of that now coming with the infrastructure bill. So I think there's no reason to think of it as limited just to those places that have the labs. In fact, it would be a little disappointing because those places already have the advantage of the labs, and in many cases, the labs are already reaching out to their communities. So, I would say first, think about where DOE could be more effective, and come to us, come to others that are working on this initiative with ideas for projects, whether they're sort of technology topics or whether they're more programmatic, like entrepreneurial leave. I think we're interested in both of those things.
So we have another question for Monica. It's really, if our park has business contacts that have projects that are wanting to implement, how do they get included or matched to funding opportunities with a local Department of Energy lab? I mean, I think I know this. They should probably go to the Federal Lab Consortium website, and I think there are business contacts for every Department of Energy lab, you know, through the tech transfer office or whatever. If I understand the question, you know, if you're talking about a local lab that matches the technology your business contacts have, I mean, obviously it doesn't make any sense if it's a, you know, clean energy lab and you're talking about, you know, some other technology. But David, what advice would you give Monica?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lab partnering service that's meant to be sort of a one-stop shop. But I mean, this is one of the big pain points we hear from people. It's a huge complex, you know, we don't know where the researchers are on, you know, my specific topic. And the DOE has been trying to make headway towards this through this lab partnering service, through its, you know, various programs. So that would be the first place to go. There's also the Office of Technology Transitions, which is the part of the headquarters DOE that's, you know, meant to facilitate this kind of activity across the whole complex. So it might be worth looking at what they're up to. And then I would encourage people who have, you know, sort of researchers in their stable to have them work through their scientific networks, because I think the strongest partnerships kind of are bottom up. And you know, lab researchers are working on all kinds of topics, and they co-author papers with people from academia. They probably have networks into industry through conferences and so on. So that may be another way, is to just make contact through that sort of grassroots level. Those are some ideas off the top of my head. But again, I think this is an area where the foundation, I hope, can help. And again, complement and add to what DOE is already trying to do. But it's been a sore point forever with DOE. It's like, just how can the outside world understand what the heck all these thousands of people are doing in extremely technical topics?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, the foundation is going to take a while to get stood up, and we need to make sure it's get some appropriations, and then they need to, you know, raise money from the private sector. But what I hear you saying is, are there particular pain points that, you know, they might address? And for people like Monica and whatever, you know, more current, you know, there are existing labs and some mechanisms, imperfect as they might be, to connect with those labs. Any other questions? Somebody want to raise a hand, or any other questions for David, or related topic? Well, unless somebody raises their hand, I think this has been, you know, very helpful. It's a great opportunity. There's a lot of money that's going to be hopefully appropriated, but you know, some of it's already appropriated for these kinds of projects. And you know, we want to help DOE labs be communities of innovation. I mean, that's our tagline. And you know, we think with a little bit of tweaking here and there, and better partnering, you know, because many of our parks themselves are, you know, have, just like you mentioned, university foundations. A lot of our parks are parts of university real estate foundations. And, you know, that's been quite effective in doing things on a more business-like way. That, I mean, universities are great in educating people, but they're not necessarily the fastest groups in building communities of innovation. And the same is true with, you know, DOE labs. They, you know, do great research, but, you know, translating that out to the local community is you know, sometimes difficult. From Dan Duncan, we have noticed an Omaha Council Bluffs biofuels lab on the map. Not familiar with this lab. That may be, David, that map you showed was not DOE labs. That was clusters, or tell us a little bit more about what that map was.
Yeah, let me put it back up just a sec. Where is it? I think that this one is pulled from I think it may be pulled from Michael Porter's work. It's sort of, oh no, it's from Brookings. So it's a map. It's a map of clusters that they identified around the country, in particular energy areas. So I don't know how big people's screens are, but I'll just like read off a thing. So it says Kansas City electric vehicle technologies, green architecture and construction services. Los Angeles organic food and farming professional environment services, solar thermal. So they basically looked for concentrations of particular industrial activities around the country. So probably people are familiar with Porter's work. This is kind of the same type of work. So these are just sort of opportunity areas where you know, the something like FESI could get active and build linkages between the department and regional industries.
Right. Okay.
So let's see, is Council Bluffs there? Right
Yeah,
here, I guess.
I'm looking at
Omaha.
Yeah,
Over
Dan,
here, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, he's from Nebraska. So yeah, biofuels, biomass, green architecture and construction.
Oh yeah, there you go. Right. That's Omaha, yeah.
So anyway, and my guess is, you know, some of these clusters are, you know, right now putting together NSF engines proposals too. And hopefully at some point when it's a little more clear what's to do, how folks will be able to participate in some of the Department of Energy, you know, energy incubators and other things that we hope to see coming down the pike. That'll be, you know, great for our members and our, you know, companies in our parks. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of funding coming, and it needs, you know, it needs willing recipients, and some of it will be a little bit complicated. I'm actually a little bit worried about the coordination across all of these different programs, and I don't know that FESI can do much about that because it's going to be multi-agencies. But I can see from the parks perspective, you know, just mapping all these opportunities and getting them to align within a single region is going to be potentially challenging, but better to have that than not to have any, I think.
So David, this is rather specific. Hopefully you can answer this. So one of our colleagues, Ballard from West Virginia, asking about the NELT in Morgantown, said you mentioned they were authorized to create a foundation. Do you happen to know if they are moving ahead with that, or were they just authorized to do that?
No, they are moving ahead with it, as I understand that provision came because they wanted to do that. I don't know the exact status of their effort, okay. But it comes from the lab director for sure. So that would be something to connect with the lab on.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that is a go-go. That's a government-owned government operation. So those are civilian, you know, they're not contractor employees.
Right. There. Right. Yeah, and that's why they needed the special call out, because all the GoCos can do it on their own, as some of them have. Right. But the GoGo needed a special, or at least they thought they needed a special provision there.
Yeah, I wish NIH has its foundation, but the researchers at NIH don't have that flexibility. Entrepreneurial leave would be great to build more bio ecosystem in the Washington, D.C. area, but so far my appeals on that have fallen on deaf ears. But anyway, maybe the West Virginia example will help motivate people. Okay, with that, I think unless anyone else has a question, we will thank you, David, for your great help, and we'll be in touch with you. How, you know, this is not something that's going to get done, you know, next week. So we will continue the conversation, and hopefully our members across the country, with our, you know, DOE labs, we can help add value and, you know, make this a better system for everyone.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your support. And you know, for those of you out in the community, keep your eyes open. I hope we'll have a kind of public portal of some kind to get project ideas, or if people have, you know, either board member suggestions or project suggestions, you're certainly welcome to send them to me at dhart@itif.org. And I think you guys have the slides. Feel free to share those around. My contact info is at the back end of those.
Oh, great. All right. Well, thank you, David. And with that, I think that concludes our webinar. We want to make mention, I don't know, Diana, do we have a slide about upcoming events at AURP. And I don't know, Vicky, do you want to jump on and say a few things? So there's Vicky. So
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry
Yeah.
about that. No, thank you all for being online today and for your questions. And David, yes, thank you so much for the partnership opportunities with our members. So we do have spring training coming up, 2023, February 27th through March 2nd, again at Tempe Mission Palms. Look forward to seeing you all there. The program is just coming together and we'll have registration open up in later December. So look forward to seeing everybody there again for those masterclass sessions. And then the Biohealth Caucus is returning again, and this time will be in Boston just ahead of the Bio International Convention. Again, we'll be putting out more information. I know that we have some speaking opportunities there that we'll be reaching out to our state bio associations and many other members. So we look forward to partnering with you on those events. And I think that is it for right now. We'll be rolling out a lot of other programs in the next month and throughout the next year. So look forward to partnering with you throughout the year. Thank you.
Bye-bye.